Welcome to Still Unbelievable, a podcast by Reason Press, where we examine religious claims, especially those made by Christians, and we regularly respond to items that are featured on the podcast Unbelievable. We embrace dialogue, but as sceptical former believers, we will also criticise unfounded claims and unsupported beliefs. Hello everybody and welcome to the first recording of Still Unbelievable for 2021. I hope you guys survived the ride okay. It was a bit rough. I think we're still trying to shake off the adrenaline, but let's see what the rest of the year brings. So welcome Andrew, first recording of the new year. First time in a long time, it's just the two of us. They should make a song about that. How are you, mate?
I am doing great. I am looking forward to 2021. I don't think I've sufficiently said goodbye to 2020 yet. You know, it's hanging on like a cheap date. But
I've long since forgotten what one of those is like.
You've been married for a long time, haven't you? I am trying to say goodbye to 2020. I think we will. And I am looking forward to 2021. I think it's going to be a good year. And this podcast makes me especially happy because it has been a long time since you and I have done a show together, and we've talked about it off air quite a lot, that we should do a better job of just doing shows with you and I more. And so I'm looking forward to this show, and I think it's going to be interesting for the listeners.
Certainly interesting is one way to put it. I haven't yet decided how this show is going to go. So if you need a hint, look at the show tagging and just check if there's an explicit link, because in about 2 hours time, I will have decided whether or not it needs one.
Right.
So yeah, this is going to go one of two ways. It's going to be a show of extremes. I don't think there's much of a middle road on this one. But before we get to that, a couple of announcements. They're currently sitting in the pipeline as I speak, but by the time you listen to this, they will have already dropped 2 episodes of Still Unbelievable, and there'll be part 1 and part 2 of the Genexus reviews that we did. That's mostly myself and the lovely Darren, who you'll also know from the Alpha series. So those will have dropped, and any feedback that you guys have on that will be gratefully received. And also on a note on that, one of the things that Andrew and I are actively looking out to do is courses investigating Christianity like Alpha and like Genexus. So if you know of a public course, of an introduction course to Christianity that is targeted at atheists, then send them our way and we will attend them so that you don't have to. And then you'll hear us talking about them at an appropriate moment. While we're talking about Genexus after the course did a feedback form. And so I filled that in and they very kindly sent me a book back. So I have now got a book that I need to read. It's called The Mind of God by an author called Paul Davies. I haven't yet read it, so we'll see how I get on with reading that. Another thing in notes is I have, again, just today, but this will be several weeks ago by the time you're listening to this, put up on our Reason Press Facebook page and also onto my Twitter account, notification that we're looking for people, listeners, that's you, lovely folks. What is your favorite Bible character? If you've listened to us for any time at all, when we do have a guest, we like to ask what is your favorite Bible character as a question of our guests. And we thought we'd like to open this out a bit more. So on the Reason Press Facebook page and also on my Twitter account, there are posts saying, what is your favorite Bible character? And those posts include a link to the audio messaging system that we use in Anchor. It's just a link. Click on the link on any internet enabled device and simply talk into the screen that you get and record a little bit about yourself and who your favorite Bible character is and why. So we'd like to encourage as many of you as possible to participate in that. Leave us a message, tell us who your character is, share it amongst your friends, Christian or non-Christian, it doesn't really matter. The bigger the range, the more fun it will be for us. And later in the year, when I've got enough of those responses, I'm hoping that we'll have enough of those responses. Let's assume that we'll get enough. we'll mix that together into an episode of however long it will be. And hopefully that will be something that's just interesting. There's no ulterior motive to that, no mocking intended. I just wanted to have some kind of interesting reasons for people picking specific characters from the Bible as their favorites. So that's my notices for this. Andrew, have you got any you want to add on top of that?
Well, I think I'll just say that I'm practicing my fake voices right now, just in case we don't get enough. And this is a hot wash. I had forgotten that I wanted to mention this off mic, but you were talking about people sending us in suggestions for introductory courses like Alpha so that we can go take them and other people don't have to. And I realized that it's possible that these sorts of introductory courses are available for other religions, Islam, as a, for instance, Judaism, but possibly even Hinduism or Buddhism, or and I wouldn't be opposed to taking those courses as well, and seeing how they stack up. And so, if you're amenable and other people want to send them in, I would be willing to do that, just in case we have listeners that that think we ought to do some comparative religion kind of work. I think that'd be great.
I think that's a really good idea. So yes, don't take my invite as being restricted just to Christianity. Include other religions in it as well, and we will give it a go. I'll have to be honest, I know other religions an awful lot less than I know Christianity, probably even a fraction of 1%. So there's a huge amount for me to learn there.
Me too.
And with that said, so today's show, this episode is a answering questions episode. Those of you who are active on Twitter, who follow us, will probably be familiar with the apologist Braxton Hunter. Now, back in last year, in 2020, that year that it won't be long before we shall not mention its name, he put up a video on YouTube, 10 questions for atheists. And we have eventually got round to answering those questions. I pulled off the audio from that YouTube video almost straight away, and I watched it a couple of times, and I've transcribed the questions. And it's just taken until now for Andrew and I to get round to sitting down together and to answering these questions. So
I don't know why nothing else happened in 2020. What took us so long?
I know. It's really, yes, quite. So
sorry, folks. We'll try to be more timely in 2021.
Don't you dare make promises that we can't keep. Right. So let's start off with the intro. The intro that Braxton gives to these 10 questions is he wants us to consider them deeply without giving glib answers.
Here, I hope my atheist interlocutors will consider these questions deeply without giving glib answers. These aren't meant to be gotcha questions, though I'm not asking for no reason. I expect you will have answers, and I want to hear what the most sincere among you have to say.
Now, you'll already think that, hang on a minute, don't you guys are still unbelievable? Don't you specialize in glib? Well, hopefully not, and we will certainly make an effort to give full and honest answers to these questions. There may be a little bit of glibity, but beneath that glibity, there will be some seriousness. So please pay attention and listen for that. He also says that there's not meant to be any gotcha questions. We'll see about that. And he also says he wants to know what the most sincere among us have to say. Braxton, if you're still listening, I can't promise to be the most sincere, but the answers that you will hear from me are my honest answers. And they are, with all laughter aside that you're guaranteed to hear, there is honesty and sincerity in the answers that I will give. In the text notes that I've written in the answers to these questions, I got a bit sweary. Whether or not I'm going to get sweary in the audio for this, that remains to be seen. But I did get sweary in my text messages because I had difficulty with some of these questions. And I'll come straight out and say it before we've even got into them. There are a couple of these questions where I felt that the question wasn't necessarily that sincere either. And there were a couple of questions where I thought, hang on a minute, did you really mean this to not be a gotcha question? Because it feels like a gotcha question. So I'm already going into this with concerns. So again, Braxton, if you're still listening, I apologize for that, but that's how I feel reading the questions. So if you feel that I'm being insincere in some of my answers, please take it in the context that I also felt that some of the questions weren't that sincere either. So my invitation to you, Braxton, before we even get into the questions is, I personally, Matthew Taylor, I much prefer a live conversation and a dialogue. I've done one debate show with Christians, and I've always said I don't like the debate format, and I still don't like the debate format. I much prefer a conversation and a dialogue, because then you get to know the person that you're talking with, you get to explain the things you want to say slightly better, and you get to hear what the other person wants to say slightly better. So I think in all of this thing, a dialogue, an honest backwards and forwards unpacking of issues is by far the best way to get to the heart of any issue. And I don't think debate format shows get close to that. And I certainly don't think remote question and answer shows like this get close to that either. So if you don't like any of the answers that we've given here, or you think that any of our answers are insufficient and you'd like to drive more deeply into some of the answers that we've given, or even your thinking behind some of your questions, because I'm fairly sure that Andrew and I are both going to question some of the thinking behind some of the questions. So I genuinely mean this, Braxton. If you have any queries, any issues, any discomfort about any of the answers that we're going to give to your questions, I'd like to say, please get in touch. Come onto the show and let's have a dialogue together. I'm absolutely certain that we'll have a far more productive session if you join us for a live conversation than what you're about to hear. Wow, that was quite an intro. Andrew, is there anything you want to caveat before we jump straight into question one?
I don't promise to stay away from being glib. I don't promise to stay away from trying to be a little humorous about this. I was set off by these questions like you were, and I think I said to you that I felt like if Braxton had a superpower, it would be poisoning the well. And I think that'll just come across as the listeners hear the questions, because the common accusation, I think, is going to, I think other people will hear that the common accusation in the way the questions are phrased is that atheist responses are not somehow as honest or sincere as they can be. Now, that said, sometimes comedy, sometimes satire comes across as lack of sincerity. I will have some of that. If it sounds that way, it's not because I don't think the heart of the questions are important. The heart of these questions, by and large, are important.
Yes.
The way the questions are. Yeah. And sometimes the way I answer the questions it may sound a little bit Saturday Night Live. But the reason is because the questions, quite honestly, are phrased a little that way. And so I will respond in kind, both in terms of the tone of the question and the substance of the question. And hopefully that won't be lost. I mean, hopefully our listeners are aware, and any new listeners are now sufficiently prepared for how we'll go at this question list. And with that in mind, I'll try to keep the tone to something that our listeners have come to appreciate about Still Unbelievable. And that is that the feedback is the kind that genuinely engages, right? The thing that people like about this show is that we try to keep the temperature down. We're not a show that deliberately creates hostility or tries to react or create reactionary situations or reactionary environments. And without babbling further, I'll let us get to the first question, and then I'll babble some more.
Yes, and for the listeners, I will be inserting audio of Braxton's questions direct from his YouTube video, so you get to hear them as they came from Braxton. Right. Question one. Right, so Andrew, this is a long question.
What facts about reality that you and I agree are real facts about the way the world is does your worldview account for, but my Christianity doesn't account for, or at least doesn't account for well? And for those of you that would point out atheism isn't a worldview, I'm talking about your worldview that includes atheism. I can't think of any. Christianity accounts for evil, suffering, the existence of other religions, including supernatural events in those other religions, science, and differences among different denominations of Christianity. But I can think of many things that the most common worldviews that include atheism don't answer as well as I think Christianity does. Like universal supernatural claims, universal religious experiences, free will, morality, near-death experiences, beauty, the rapid expansion of the early church, the events surrounding the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth, and our shared longing for purpose and meaning. So what is it that Christianity doesn't answer as well as your worldview?
What facts about reality that you and I agree are real facts about the way the world is, does your worldview account for, but my Christianity does not account for, or at least does not account for well?
Just wow, right? So I honestly don't know what kind of Christianity Braxton practices. Does he believe that Old Testament slavery was acceptable or was it not acceptable? Does he think that women should be allowed to preach or not? Is abortion acceptable or not acceptable? What role does a wife play in comparison to her husband? Those are all religious questions, and I have no idea how Braxton would answer any of them and whether they're compatible with my secular worldview. But this goes much further than that. I don't know what Braxton's view on science is. Is the Earth 6,000 years old? If he thinks so, our worldviews are not compatible. Does Braxton think that the universe continues moment by moment only because of the mind of God? If he does, our worldviews aren't compatible. So right away, I don't quite know what we agree on and what we don't agree on.
I think that's very important. What is it that we actually agree on? In the latter half of his question, he says, like universal supernatural claims, universal religious experiences, free will, morality, near-death experiences, beauty, the rapid expansion of the early church, the events around the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth. There's not much in there for he and I to agree on that are facts about the way the world is. So as soon as you start removing the things that he and I won't agree on, there isn't much left. I doubt that we agree that there are universal supernatural claims. Yes. How does his Christianity explain it? Oh, well, it says God did it. Is that a better explanation than the psychology of science? Not in the slightest. So fail there. Universal religious experiences. Yes, people have experiences that they assign to their religion, but it's the same. Does God did it or the Holy Spirit did it? Is that any superior to the science of psychology? I doubt it. I don't accept it. Free will, that's a no. Morality, that's a no. Near-death experiences, well, experiences, yes, but I doubt that his experience of them works at all, because presumably it's an out-of-body soul or spirit type thing, which doesn't agree with what we know about science. So there's a no there. Beauty, well, that's a subjective label that we call things, a bit like morality. So that's a no there. The rapid expansion of the early church. Well, when you've got an invading army with weapons drawn, killing people, there's going to be some kind of expansion, isn't there? So what really does that expansion actually mean? He's going to say it was the work of the Holy Spirit. We're going to say it's how humans moved across the land. So we're certainly not going to agree about that. And I don't see how the power of the Holy Spirit really works in that kind of expansion, because humans did it across all of history. What makes that particular expansion any different other than it's attached to Christianity? So there are an awful lot there for us to scratch out, because he and I don't agree that they're facts about the way the world is. And those that tentatively hang on, descriptions and of the two and the way our worldviews account for them are radically different. And his worldview has an account that is indistinguishable from magic. So by definition, it can't be better. And this is a problem that we have. Probably the best real fact that he and I can agree on is the Earth has a moon that's slowly slipping away from us by a couple of centimeters a year. I don't know how Christianity accounts for that, but I certainly know how my worldview accounts for that. And I think it accounts for it extraordinarily well.
I do too. And I want to take a moment to talk about religious experiences and near-death experiences and demonstrate how my worldview, and I think how your worldview works as well, but you should disagree with me where we disagree. Universal religious experience. No. And here's why. Do lots and lots of people in lots and lots of places report religious experience? Yes, but they don't attribute it to the same cause. So if I were to say that we have a more or less universal experience of wetness, we all have had water, and we know where that experience comes from. We broadly attribute it to the same source, and that's water. Even if occasionally it's got additives like salt or whatever, we know what water is. And so when we say universal religious experience, now, well, some people think it's Jehovah, some people think it's Yahweh, some people think it's various Hindu gods, some people think it's Allah. I don't know what Braxton means by universal religious experience. But whatever he means by it, he doesn't appear to mean by universal religious experience the same thing that I think of when we talk about the experience of wetness or the color of the sky or what it means to be cold. We have a better description for those things that we all share, or at least we more broadly share, than this idea of universal religious experience. Then we move to near-death experiences, and I'll just ask this one question. I question whether it is possible for a dead human brain to record memory, to record an experience. Braxton, in order to support his position that we can have these near-death experiences, has to support one of these two positions. There's no, as far as I can tell, we're excluding the middle entirely between these two options. Either you have a functioning human brain that can record memories, and what it is recording is a crossover to some other place in the sense of, I saw this light and I had this sensation of well-being, or I saw this fire and I had this sense of dread about my eternal punishment. If that's the kind of near-death experience we're talking about, either a human brain did it in a functioning state, or he thinks that memory was recorded somewhere else, and it is being reported not through the human brain. Live human brains record memories. Dead human brains don't. That's how my worldview works. And if you think that you've got these memories from another place and they come to you in some non-material way, I don't accept that. I have good reason for not accepting it. We know what it takes to record a memory by and large. And if you think there's another mechanism, that's a conversation I want to have. If you're a dualist and you think that your memories are stored out in the cloud somewhere, they're not on your local hard drive or your local solid state drive, then we need to have that conversation. Let's pull that apart. Let's figure out that mechanism. How do you attribute memory and the reporting of your memory from person to person to a thing that you can't demonstrate exists? And if you think you can, let's have that conversation. That's how my worldview works in both those cases. And you can broadly take that and apply them to all of the rest of the things that Braxton has to say in question number one.
Yes, and talking on the worldview thing, we should make a note on that. The second sentence in his first question is, and for those of you that say that atheism is not a worldview, we're talking about your worldview. That includes atheism. And I want to pull that little bit out because that shows that Braxton's been listening to what certainly some atheists have been saying. And I am certainly an atheist that denies that atheism is a worldview. So I just want to pause and do a bit of clarification here, because I want to thank Braxton for acknowledging this point, certainly from my perspective, because I don't like it when I am told that my worldview is atheism, because that doesn't describe my worldview at all. I would say that I've got an evidential worldview or a skeptic worldview. Atheism is a property, an attribute, a function that has arisen out of my worldview. I've become atheist because of the way that my worldview evolved as I was deconstructing out of Christianity. The worldview, the foundations of my worldview came while I was deconstructing from Christianity, and atheism came up out of that. So I want to say, yes, please acknowledge that atheism is part of my worldview, but it does not define my worldview, and it is certainly not the foundation of my worldview. So thanks for that one. And the reason why I said that, so I just quickly, the reason why I said that was because that comes up in a couple of the other questions. So I just wanted to draw attention to that.
I'm glad you did, because I think I largely agree with you. And I want to put a pin in a similar place about my worldview. My lack of belief in a God, we'll get into this more fully as the next couple of questions unfold, but my lack of belief in a God is probably the least relevant thing about my actual worldview. When we think about water, water is composed of oxygen and hydrogen, but water is not oxygen or hydrogen, right? It takes both in a particular set of proportions, yada, yada, yada. It is the case that I am an atheist. It is not the case that atheism is my worldview. It takes many, many things to compose my worldview. I am largely a humanist. I am largely a naturalist. I am largely a person who believes that first of all, we should do no harm. There are lots of principles about my worldview. Lack of belief in a God mostly is not the most important one, unless I just happen to be talking about someone who's willing to vote their conscience because they believe in a God and they think I should have to too.
And just as a quick heads up, because I should have said this right at the start before we move on to question 2, I am fully aware that there have been quite a few other atheist channels and podcasts who've also addressed these groups of questions, and we're certainly very late to the party on all of that. I have intentionally avoided all of the atheist responses to these questions because I wanted my answers to be my answers and untainted by anyone else's answers. So any similarity my answers might have with any other atheist, that's just because we're both really cool people, and it's got nothing to do with the fact that I might have cheated by watching their answer, because I haven't. This is fresh without me watching or reading or listening to anybody else's answer.
That's a good note. And, we share a notebook. We've talked about it on other podcasts. We mentioned the Still Unbelievable notebook from time to time where we keep our show notes. And I prepared my my answers before I read your answers. So it'll be interesting to see during this show how compatible our answers are. I did eventually read them all after I finished writing my answers, and for the same reason that you mentioned.
Question 2 is a bit shorter.
If your definition of atheism is merely that it's a lack of belief in God and you're just waiting to be convinced, but then you speak of him as though he's in some way synonymous with Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, or fairies, doesn't that at least send the message to your listeners that you actually believe that there is no God? After all, these are entities and beings that you likely believe do not exist. And if your response is that you merely lack a belief in Santa Claus and don't actively believe that he does not exist, doesn't that sound a little disingenuous, honestly?
I'm going to take this one first. So I'm going to say to the first half, yes, it does send that message. I'm quite happy to acknowledge that. You'll hear on another episode that Andrew and I did over on Proscenium, where we talk about belief versus knowledge and the variations of belief. We touch a little bit on atheism, although the show isn't about religious belief at all. And I normally identify as an atheist who has a lack of belief, but that lack of belief is dialed quite the way towards belief. And you'll probably hear on that episode where I begrudgingly accept that, I believe there is no God. I think the exact position where I am, whether it's a lack of belief in God or whether I actually believe there is no God, I think that's the less important part, quite frankly. If you're a Christian listening to me talk on anything and I say atheist and I say I lack a belief in God, don't dwell too much on that, but I do get the point with the first half of this question. If somebody says, I lack a belief in God, but I believe that Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and fairies don't exist, because let's be honest about those three things. I do believe there is no Santa Claus, I do believe there is no Easter Bunny, and I do believe there are no fairies. So if I compare God with those things, then am I sending the message that I actually believe there is no God? Well, yes, actually, that is a fair point, and I absolutely concede that point. And sometimes even atheists like myself, despite my really cool and funky British accent, are clumsy in the words that we use. So I think the message that I would say there is, let's not get tied up over whether atheism is a lack of belief or whether it is I don't believe in a God. Because regardless of which of those two I am, the only thing that will change that is enough evidence to convince me that there is a God, and it will get me over the line regardless of where my starting point is. So I think the thing that I want the Christian to take away from that is, what have you got that can get me over the line? Forget about where I am now or how far the line is away from me. What have you got that could get me over it? Because regardless of my starting point, if what you've got is good, then it will get me over.
Yes, to every bit of that. I'll just say that if I were Braxton, I think I'd go back and edit this YouTube video because it seems to me that the comparison he drew between Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny is not actually the comparison that he wanted to draw to put this question in its best possible light. And here's why. If I walked into a building that was built to Santa Claus and lots of adults were sitting around and singing songs to Santa Claus, and these adults thought that there was a Santa Claus that maintained an elf slave factory, and these elves manufactured goods, and this dude delivered them every December 24th to good little boys and girls, you better believe I'd ridicule it if it was an adult. Mm-hmm. We tell these stories to children. And the problem with comparing Christianity to Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny is that they are similar stories. You are telling a story about a guy that you think has superpowers, a guy that can deliver blessings to whoever he wants, whenever he wants, and all they have to do is be on the good list rather than the naughty list. And so I really think if you want to convince me that your God exists, you should do better than a Santa Claus comparison. Because I don't believe in your God for the same reason I don't believe in Santa Claus. Maybe what you should be asking is not whether I am somehow poisoning the well by demonstrating to the people around me or suggesting to people around me that I don't believe in your God. Maybe what you should be asking is, what can I bring to the table that is sufficiently relevant to demonstrate to you that I have this invisible friend that can bless you or not, that he works better than random chance, or that he works in a country far, far away, and if you were just disadvantaged and impoverished, if you didn't have food and you'd never heard his name, maybe he too would do miracles for you. Please bring me something better than the fact that my lack of belief is somehow a problem for the people around me. Let's not talk about, we can, but it is useless to talk about why I don't believe unless you can bring something reasonable to me that says I should believe. Let's have that conversation. And to that end, Matthew, you and I are in lockstep. Bring the evidence.
Yeah, evidence is a good thing, but I'd like to sidetrack here about belief and what belief means, because this feeds back into the podcast episode over on proscenium that I mentioned. Belief covers a range of commitments. And part of the problem for me, and this is why I try to avoid the word belief, and this is part of the reason why I prefer to use the definition of atheism of having no belief rather than believing there is none. And it's because my experience of Christianity has poisoned the word belief for me. It has made me averse to using and holding and admitting to holding anything as a belief. That is one of the negative effects of Christianity that I continue to carry more than 10 years after leaving Christianity. And it's because as a Christian, for me, belief went hand in hand with certainty, with an absolute commitment to something. And that if there was anything that questioned that belief, the source of the questioning needed to be rejected. And so when you use the word belief, to me, that is the mental image that I have. A firm, fixed position. You've planted a pole in the ground and you're at a position that you want to hold to. And you're gripping onto that hold, and you will reject any effort whatsoever to shift you from that position. I don't want to ever, in my mind, be in that position ever again. I found it deeply disconcerting letting go of the pole of my Christian faith. And I found it deeply disconcerting, changing my mindset from a belief of certainty to a belief of things that are held tentatively because of the evidence that you've got, but you're willingly moved to the next tentative position when evidence suggests that's a completely different mindset of belief to the belief that I held as a Christian. So when I say I'm an atheist who lacks a belief in God, don't see it the way that Braxton saw it in his question. See it the way I'm saying it, as a damaged former Christian who is allergic to belief because of what it meant for him in those years of Christianity. So see it that way. See it with compassion as somebody who is trying to navigate through life to the things that make most sense, to the things with evidence, and is trying very hard to reject the kind of absolute certainty, or as somebody that Andrew and I both know put it very eloquently, the cocaine of certainty that is deeply, deeply damaging to the psyche.
Yeah, no, such a good piece of writing. Such a good piece of writing. I am going to leave that right there. I'm not going to say anything else because that is exactly right.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so let's move on to question 3.
When atheism becomes a part of someone's worldview, they typically change their positions on other issues like abortion, sexual morality, and a number of other things. I actually have several videos of well-known atheists saying that there's nothing wrong with prostitution, that they hope their children don't save themselves until marriage, and that sex workers should be put up on a pedestal no different than the military. I didn't use those here because I didn't want to seem combative to individuals, specifically the individuals who made those statements. But even if you didn't become an atheist just so you could sin, and I believe you, do you at least understand why those moves could send that message to people who might say that to you?
This touches sensitive points, I think, the answers to this.
It does. Here's why. Well, okay, maybe it sends that kind of signal that this sort of problem for other people. Here's why I don't particularly care, in the sense that, if they're having a strong reaction to the fact that I disagree, here's why I'm not particularly bothered. I don't think the notion of sin is a rational notion. As far as I can tell, there is no God. As far as I can tell, there's no sin quota. There's no Lamb's Book of Life. There's no guy out there putting people on the who's been good and who's been naughty list. And so if you come to me and you say, I have a problem with what you're doing because it's a sin, that reads to me like you have a problem with what I'm doing because I didn't read Harry Potter last night. I just don't care overly much in that sense. Now, sex workers, there are some grounds upon which I have a problem with prostitution. There are other grounds where I don't. Here's a ground where I have problems with it. Anyone that is forced to be a prostitute in order to live, in order to eat, in order to keep their children in shoes or clothes, or in order to furnish somebody else's lifestyle because they're a victim to that person, you can just damn well believe I've got a problem with it. On the other hand, I don't think that sex is wrong. I don't think that enjoying sex is wrong. I don't find it reprehensible or offensive in any way. And if we did a better job of defending the men and women in our lives who were vulnerable, there are those, then we wouldn't have a sex trade that looks like it looks now. And the people that practice prostitution would be doing so because they legitimately enjoy the thing they're doing. And for those people who are practicing prostitution because they enjoy it, and yes, I know some, I don't have a problem with it.
No, me neither. I'd like to address the first sentence in this question first before I move on to the last sentence. So the first sentence was, when atheism becomes part of someone's worldview, they typically change their positions on other issues like abortion, sexual morality, and a number of other things. Yes, that's true, but I want to flip it the other way round. And again, this is true for me, and it is true for quite a lot of other atheists who are former Christians as well. When people become more compassionate about other people, become a little bit more humanist in their looking around at other people, they soften their views on things like abortion, sexual morality, and a number of other things. And that softening process takes a while. It goes minor step at minor step at minor step. And the softening is gradual. And then suddenly you find yourself thinking, oh, same-sex marriage isn't so bad after all. I support my same-sex attracted friends and relatives, and the other things. And then as the road goes longer and your views on other people and your compassion towards other people who you were less compassionate about before, eventually you get to the point where I came, where the atheism comes along too because of your outlook. And the way the first sentence is phrased is it can kind of give you the impression that the atheism comes first and then the changes in the other things. That doesn't happen. The move from Christianity to atheism, the softening on those other things happens before the atheism arrives. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in your mind. I have never visited a sex worker, but morally, I don't have a problem with sex workers. I have concerns about some of the other ancillary activities that usually go with sex work and some of the nefarious, the drug taking, not for a moral reason, but for health reason, and for some of the moral things that come out of it, like the addiction and what happens when people become addicted. I have problems with all that. And I have problems with the people who utilize sex workers for control. And I have compassion for the sex workers who find themselves being manipulated and controlled by stronger others. So yes, I have issues around that industry, but I don't have a moral problem with sex work as it is. I don't know how to parse the bit about putting them on a pedestal, no different to the military. It's not a phrase that I've ever considered before, so I'm not going to even respond beyond that. Now, the last sentence, but even if you didn't become atheist just so that you could sin, and he says he believes us, and I believe him that he believes us, do you at least understand?
And I believe you that you believe him that he believes us.
Don't you start. But do I at least understand why those moves could send that message to people who might say this? Yes, I do, if they don't understand properly the thing that I said a couple of minutes ago. And I have had it said to me many times that I am atheist just because I wanted to sin. It is the second most common thing that I've heard from Christians when I say that I am a former Christian, now atheist. The first one obviously being that I was never a Christian in the first place. But the second one is because I just want to sin. Whoever you are, if you believe that, and Braxton doesn't say it, so I'm going, well, actually he does. He says that he believes me. So I'm excluding Braxton from this. But really, screw you Christians if you're a Christian who says that. And I mean that absolutely. It is utterly, utterly unhelpful, as well as being utterly, utterly untrue. And the reason why you get that message is because you've misunderstood the process of deconstruction. The problem is your interpretation of what happened to me. And if you don't understand that after listening to this, then you're not listening. If you say it, you're wrong. If you don't understand it after listening, you're not listening. The fault is absolutely 100% all yours. And thank you, Braxton, for believing me.
Just 30 or 45 more seconds on that first sentence, because in sort of the heat of the moment, I left that out. When I deconverted, and there are deconversion stories as broad and deep as we have kinds of people in the world with the kinds of sophisticated lives that we lead. My deconversion was much more about what I saw as problems in Christianity. You and I both have talked at some length in the past that we were both young earth creationists, right? That was a much bigger problem for me than what do I do about abortion? The idea that there was some God that I could pray to and he would answer the right kinds of prayers. I looked at the body of prayer that I prayed in my life. And as far as I could tell, there was no God figuring out what prayers were good and what prayers were bad and what things he should grant and what things he shouldn't grant. Prayer failed. And that drove me away from Christianity. Did these larger sort of questions about sexuality eventually come in? Yes, they did. But for me, they were much further along in the process. And so Braxton's first sentence just doesn't hit right for me.
No, it doesn't, does it? Right. Okay. Moving on to question 4. Nice short one here.
If it's a lack of belief sort of atheism, what is it? Is it 50-50, 60-40, 75-25? And at what point do you feel disingenuous saying that you merely lack a belief as opposed to leaning towards, I believe that God does not exist?
Percentages. I can't percentifize, whatever the right eyes is to add on the word end of percentage. I can't put a percentage on what my atheism is. I don't think that way. The question hits the buzzer for me. I'm sorry. I understand what Braxton's trying to say behind this question. My mind doesn't put a percentage on where I am on that. So I genuinely am not able to answer this. I'm just not clued into this way of thinking.
Braxton's question invites the respondent to confuse the idea of knowledge and belief. It is possible to be an agnostic atheist. It is also possible to claim to be a Gnostic atheist. It is possible to be an agnostic Christian or a Gnostic Christian. In other words, one of those is about the domain of things that we believe, and the other is about the domain of things that we think we know. Those things shouldn't be confused. I am an agnostic atheist to the extent that there are claims about a God that I could be convinced of, and on those claims, I am not currently convinced, and I am agnostic about them. So are you really suggesting that by moving these percentages, I should somehow stop being an agnostic atheist? I think the question is malformed. I think it invites the respondent to confuse two domains. I think we should be very careful about that. And I am ultimately not interested in having that kind of confusion. But if you really want an answer to what likelihood I think there is that there's a God, it would look something like this. As far as I can tell, the universe is one that is best described by naturalism. And because everything that I experience, I think is natural in the sense of properties that we have that either exist at a lower level or become emergent from combinations of things like oxygen and hydrogen creating in the right proportion a sense of wetness, right? Because as far as I can tell, the universe is a materialistic place. And because there are some fairly unique claims that the Christians can't demonstrate about there being this non-physical realm that is not subject to time and space, because everything I see appears to be something else other than that, then the base rate that I have for the universe that I see is pretty damned high. What likelihood do I think that there's a non-material God that is not subject to the laws of space and time? Well, that approaches zero. So if that's the answer you were looking for, there it is.
I've just gone and peeked at the notes that I read, and I'd like to answer this again, but with a different analogy. I'd like to go to the aliens analogy. I hold no belief regarding the existence of aliens, so I lack the belief that they're aliens. I do not hold the belief that there are no aliens, and equally, I do not hold the belief that there are aliens, because I am, in terms of the evidence that I have insufficient evidence either way. The only thing that I can be certain that I do believe is I believe that no aliens have visited Earth in their spacecraft. But that's got nothing to do with whether or not I believe there are aliens out there on planets that we have yet to discover or have yet to discover us. I can't put a percentage on where on the scale between 0 and 100 my belief with respect to the existence of aliens is. All I can do is deny that I have a belief. Personally, I would love there to be aliens. I genuinely want there to be aliens. And I genuinely want us to be able to find some evidence of them before I die. I think it's highly unlikely that I will live to see that. But I genuinely, and I mean this absolutely sincerely with all my heart, I genuinely want to see evidence of intelligent alien life elsewhere, either in our galaxy or in the universe. It will most likely be in our galaxy. Before I die, it would be the most cool thing ever. The only point in which I would feel disingenuous, putting it back to this question and replacing atheism with alienism, is that if I had the evidence and I continued to deny them, that would be the point in which I would be disingenuous. And before you start screaming at your listening device, whatever podcast thing you're listening to this podcast on, I think the evidence for God is not too dissimilar to the evidence for aliens, in that there isn't anything tangible that we can test. Yes, there are arguments, but I don't include arguments in the bucket called evidence. But that we might get onto that later. But no, short answer, I can't put a percentage, and no, there is no point in which I'll be disingenuous until it's 100%.
So you're going to get your wish. Okay, this is sort of a teaser for a news bite. I kid you not. This is a true story. You can check this on CNN. Fox News also ran an article on this. So, turn to your favorite biased news channel.
You naughty boy.
Whichever one you want. I don't care whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. You can even be a Brit. It'll be fine. Okay, I'm kidding. In that giant, massive COVID relief package that just passed here in the U.S., and it includes some defense spending and all that sort of thing. The giant thing we did in December was a couple $1 trillion. Tucked away in those thousands of pages of legislation was this little tidbit. I kid you not. The Congress has issued a mandate to the U.S. Department of Defense, so in other words, the U.S. military, to create a publicly accessible report in the next 180 days. The clock started when this thing was passed back in late December. A public report in the next 180 days regarding what the U.S. knows about unidentified flying objects. And here's why that happened. Back last year, the U.S. Navy released 3 clips of naval fighter pilots. I think they were all Navy. Apologies if I get that bit of information slightly confused. Could have been Marines as well, or possibly an Army aviator, or an Air Force aviator. In any case, there were 3 clips released of objects that were tracked by U.S. military fighters that were actually called unidentified during the clips. And they track them by eye and on radar, and they talk about them. And these were real clips. They were released. It re-engendered that interest that we have had as a nation and as a world in what these unidentified objects are. And the U.S. Congress has started the clock on a report that will be largely public. They've been allowed a secret index. I don't know what that means, but it's in the legislation. So this report will disclose to the public what the military knows about UFOs. True story.
And it will be the same damp squib that it always is. Come on, stop getting my hopes up over what's absolutely going to be nothing. It'll either be some obscure weather balloon or a Russian spy plane or something. Come on.
So they are talking about UAVs. Unmanned aerial vehicles or whatever, because it can be very lightweight, so they can do unusual things. Probably that's going to be the report. It'll be interesting to build some anticipation around it and see what they have to say. But on the record, although we're off topic,
just a bit. Come on.
Well, on the record, I find it extraordinarily unlikely that we've ever been visited by aliens from another planet. And I've talked about why on other shows. If people want to know, they can write in and ask. And we'll talk about it then.
Okay. Right. So moving on, question 5.
Now, I know we've all got our talking points, but I want you to struggle to be as sincere with yourself as you can right now. Doesn't it bother you a little bit that when we come to talk about the origins of the universe, and if there's a multiverse, the origin of that too, that the only real options you've got besides God is a past infinite universe, which is impossible, or the universe coming to exist uncaused out of nothing, or something far less clear than even those? It seems that for any worldview that includes atheism, there's a massive blind spot when it comes to the origin of the universe. And all the attempts to try and circumvent that problem seem desperate and at least far less likely than theism. My question isn't just what do you typically say about this, because I'm well aware of the responses. My question is simply this: when you step away from the debate mode that it's so easy for us all to get into online, doesn't this issue destabilize you a little bit? It seems to fit really poorly with any worldview that includes atheism.
Now, we've all got our talking points, but I want you to struggle to be as sincere as yourself as you can right now. I think this is where I lost it.
You did in your answer. It was great.
Doesn't it bother you just a little bit when we come to talk about the origins of the universe, and if there's a multiverse, the origin of that too? Blah, 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 blah. My question isn't just what do you typically say about this, because I'm well aware of the responses. My question is simply this: when you step away from the debate mode that is so easy for us to get into online, doesn't this issue destabilize you just a little bit? It seems to fit really poorly with any worldview that includes atheism. Right, Andrew, go. Your turn to go first.
Are you sure? Because you had great thunder in your answer. I will go if you want me to.
Yeah, you go first. I don't think I'm feeling it quite the same way as I did when I was doing it on my own. You've managed to diffuse me a little bit.
Okay, let me get you fired up then. First of all, being honest is not a fucking struggle. I am perfectly happy to decide to be honest or not to be honest. And it's not this doesn't create that kind of struggle. Are there things that I struggle with? Yes. But a discussion of the origin of the universe is not one of those things that causes me to struggle. And Braxton, if it causes you to struggle, you should probably see your therapist. Okay. All of that said, I don't know what the best explanation for the universe is. We did a show over on Proscenium a couple of months ago with the fabulous Philip Hopper, Skydive Phil. And Phil is the reporter for the Royal Astronomical Society. And he took us through a deep, deep dive into modern cosmology and various models of the universe. It started out of a conversation about loop quantum cosmology, LQC, but we also talked about cyclical cosmic cosmology, Sir Roger Penrose. We talked about string theory and superstrings. We talked about all kinds of things in that show. And in that sense, we got down to what the best minds that we have access to have to say about the origin of the universe. And our best minds are not saying this: God did it. And so if you think that me lining up with the best minds we have and saying, as far as I can tell, God didn't do it, somehow creates a moment of pause or discomfort for me, think again. It doesn't. I will say this: I don't know which model will ultimately be successful, if we will ever have one. But inserting a God into any of them doesn't solve the problems that we have, because this God, this immaterial, timeless idea, is just that, an idea. It is less demonstrable than the Big Bang. It is less demonstrable than space and time. It is about as demonstrable as turtles all the way down. So no, I'm not bothered by the question. And I am comfortable that our best minds have some good ideas. In fact, I'm far, far more comfortable exploring those ideas than getting my cosmology out of a book written by goat herders 3,000 years ago.
Yeah, if you want a good answer and a thoughtful answer from people like myself, and you introduce your questions with, please consider them deeply, please don't give glib answers, these aren't meant to be gotcha questions. Don't then load a question with projection. Don't patronize me in your question. Don't say, I want you to struggle to be as sincere with yourself as you can right now. And don't say, there's a massive blind spot when it comes to this, when atheism is involved. And don't say, doesn't this destabilize you? Just a little bit, because all that's going to get from me is a massive fuck you. And then I'm not going to be bothered to answer your question because you've pissed me off. So seriously, if you want thoughtful answers from me, if you're going to lay it out that you're not trying to piss me off, and then you use these kinds of phrases that piss me off, then we're on to a bad relationship from the start. So think about how you ask your questions, please. So to answer the question, no, the beginning of the universe, however it was, is not a problem for atheism. There is no blind spot, and there absolutely is no destabilization. And the reason for that is there is stacks we don't know about the start of the universe. We're only just starting to rake over the kind of information that is available for us to learn, to find out, and to know. The amount that we've learned over the last couple of decades is immense, and it's still only a tiny fraction of what is left for us to learn. There are options available for how the universe began. There are various models, all of which kind of work with the physics that we've got and that we understand. And the job of the cosmologists studying it all is try to work out which of the available models that they've got is the most likely, or whether they're all wrong and there's something else to come about. This is ongoing science, which we're currently learning. The right answer is not available to us at this moment. We're still trying to work it out. And I'm cool with that. And I'm fine with that. I do not need to pick an answer based on lack of information. I do not need to make up an answer to fill in the gaps so that I can land on something to be confident in. I have absolutely no desire to do that. I am absolutely content to read the papers as they come out and learn about the cool stuff that they're discovering, about which models are coming in and out of favor and about which ones are getting evidence to support them. That's how the science works. And I'll tell you something else about all of this. None of it needs a God to do it, which basically seems to be what the Christian answer is. It's an extra layer on top of which is precious little is known. God did it. That actually doesn't help. And that should actually be the destabilizing factor, because you're constantly having to work God into what science doesn't know, because every time science knows something, hey presto, there's no God there to find. So it's not destabilizing for me, but I want to push back and say it should be destabilizing for you. And no, it doesn't fit poorly. There's so much more I could say on this, but I don't think I can be bothered. Right. Okay. Question 6. Let's go. Okay. Short one.
Of the arguments for God's existence, is there one that to you seems more interesting than the rest? Is there one that for you actually does weigh in favor of theism? Which one?
No.
Yeah. No. Short question, short answer. Yes, some of them are interesting, and I would possibly say fine-tuning is interesting in the technical sense that it's interesting because I like looking for ways in which science has shown that what Christians think is fine-tuning for God really isn't. So I find that interesting. Another one that I kind of find interesting for the complete opposite reason is the evolutionary argument against naturalism, because it's utter stinky nonsense. So it's interesting that way, in that I'm curiously interested in why anyone would be convinced by it, in the same way that I'm curiously interested in why a pig loves to wallow in stinky mud, but I have absolutely no desire whatsoever to join it.
That's great.
But is there one that actually weighs in favor of theism? No, I don't do arguments. Bring me evidence. Arguments, not evidence. Go for it. Have you recovered?
No, I look because pig wallowing instead. I don't know if I'm going to recover from that this year. It was great.
My pigs don't have lipstick on. Just remember that.
Yeah. So I don't know what it would.
Actually, no. Before you go, I'd like to ask a question.
Please.
What is the Christian fascination with arguments? Is it because they got nothing else? Is this what comes up when you don't have evidence? You go, oh, there must be an argument. Oh, look at that, my favorite argument. Seriously, arguments don't impress me. Bring me the evidence. Why? If you're a Christian, write in, tell us, reasonpress@gmail.com. Why are arguments so exciting for you guys? I don't get it. Sorry, you can go now. You can go.
So it occurs to me, I think I've said this before, this is very slightly tangential, but other religions are convinced by their own righteousness in the same way that Christianity is. One of the reasons we don't know that as clearly as we know about Christianity is because much of the other world's religions are blocked off to those of us who only speak English or another very Western language, right? How many of us speak Arabic and are familiar, for instance, with the arguments for Islam? How many of us speak Hindu? How many of us speak any kind of Chinese? My point is only this. We might think that arguments for Christianity are compelling just because we can read those arguments. It's very possible that if you could read Arabic or Chinese or read Hindi, maybe you would find some of those arguments compelling. In short, I'm saying this. Matthew's right. Arguments aren't evidence. And all you need to do is look at the huge number of world religions. And the one thing that religions haven't settled, what is it? Whose God is real? Bring me some evidence. We can have a different show.
Yep. I think there's another question where we can talk about evidence. Right. Question 7. This might actually be it.
Most atheists I've met humbly admit that they don't think they can have absolute certainty about much of anything. But what they want from the Christian is a demonstration that God exists or that Christianity is true. Well, when we offer the reasons to believe that we do have, those are typically deemed not good enough. So what sort of evidence, if any, would be enough to convince you? Do you know? And since it's often a conversation stopper, let's take experimental reproducibility off the table, since that's not even always necessary for science.
Most atheists humbly admit that you can't, but they don't think that they can have absolute certainty about much of anything. But what they want from the Christian is a demonstration that God exists or that Christianity is true. He's clearly digging there for a conflict, for a contradiction. But when we offer them the reasons to believe, notice not evidence that we do have, those are typically deemed not good enough. You're right, arguments aren't evidence. So what sort of evidence, if any, would be enough to convince you? Do you know? And since it's often a conversation stopper, let's take experimental reproducibility off the table, disallowed, barred, because that's not always necessary even for science.
Okay, 2 things. I don't need my girlfriend to provide evidence that you exist. If you want me to know, you can damned well tell me yourself. So I'm actually not asking Christians to prove that God exists. If he wants me to know, he can damn well do it on his own. That's the first thing. Yes, I know exactly what it would take to convince me that there's a God. By the way, I could still be wrong if I was convinced, but there are things that could convince me. You could demonstrate that it is possible to live forever. You could demonstrate that there's a God that can live forever. You could demonstrate that that God maintains a nice and naughty book, that he has the good judgment to put all the right people in it and keep all the wrong people out. And then you could convince me that through evidence, mind you, that this God does or doesn't maintain an eternal torture chamber for the people that aren't in the book. Yeah, if you could do those things, I could be convinced. Now, whether I should be convinced is a different story. How would you demonstrate that it is possible to know everything? What final bit of knowledge could someone bring to the table, even a God, and say, I now know that this bit of knowledge, this last fact, or this last interaction, or this last exploration, or this last thought, or whatever it is the thing that completes the set, and I now know everything. How many moments in time would you have to string together serially to demonstrate that a God could live forever? These are extraordinary, extraordinary claims. And telling me that you think somebody rose from the dead, or that you turned water to wine, or that some dude fed 5,000 people and then 4,000, or he casted out demons or whatever, none of that gets to whether somebody created a universe or can live forever or has an eternal torture chamber or has good judgment. And in fact, by the way, some of those things demonstrate that he doesn't have good judgment. Why are there starving people? So there you are. What would it take to convince me? You have to address your central claims, the things that you really want me to believe. Right now, that's not being done.
I'm going to go for the last one first, the whole reproducibility thing. No, I'm not taking reproducibility off the table. If you've got evidence for God, I want to test it. I want to know how you gathered the evidence, and I want to be able to repeat it myself. And the whole point about science is that we do have reproducibility. Now, Braxton says here that it's not always necessary for science. Well, I'd like to know what he is that he's thinking about. If you know what Braxton is thinking about, or Braxton, if you want to tell me what it is that you're thinking about, reasonpress@gmail.com. Let us know what it is. I can imagine
have an open invite, right?
Open invite. I will not turn you down. I can imagine that one of them might be a murder. We don't reproduce a murder to prove that the killer killed somebody. No, but what we do is we break down all the components into little tiny testable bits. If the deceased has got a hole through them, but you haven't got what it was that made the hole, there are tests we can do against a replicator of flesh to try to work out what it probably was that made the hole. Was it long and narrow, like a knife, or was it round, like a bullet, or was it something else? Was it a steak? Was it a round steak? Hexagonal steak, did it have flat edges?
Was it jagged like a chainsaw?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are many things that we can do to replicate what the damage is on the victim's body. And then we can do the same for the accused. DNA, fibers from clothes at the scene, maybe some blood from the attacker. Was it cross-contaminated? Was it his brother-in-law who he hugged earlier in that day, or those fibers that you found, and he's actually innocent? There are things you can do to test this kind of thing. You don't need to replicate the whole thing in one hit. You can break it down and replicate the little bits in isolation to come up with your answers, and then you can repiece it all back together to fit the picture. So I don't know what it is that's being thought about here as reproducibility not always being necessary. So bring in what it is that you're thinking. We can discuss that in greater detail. So no, I'm not accepting that comes off the table, because I absolutely want to test for God that I can test myself. Because you telling me that you prayed for somebody and they got up out of their wheelchair and walked isn't good enough for me, because I can't redo it. Yeah, it's true that we can't have absolute certainty about much, but we can have a pretty close. Now, I near as damn it am absolutely certain that if I pick up the mouse that I've got here on my desk and then let go of it, it's going to land back on my desk because of how gravity works. No, in a technical sense, I can't have absolute certainty, but to all intensive purposes, I am absolutely certain. So there's a bit of weaselly wordage going on about here, and I think it's worded this way to try to create a disingenuous conflict in that first sentence, but it really isn't there at all. And the final thing, do I actually know what it would be convince me about God? I don't know specifically what it would be, but it would have to be something that can be testable. And as Andrew said, ideally, it would come from God, because let's be honest, God, if he exists, is the only being who would know what it would take. And since his good word actually suggests that seeking will find and asking will get, and I did both for many years before giving up, and I got nothing. So it's really his move. Sorry, guys.
You said something that was so powerful to me when you were going through the idea that we know how to assess whether some person killed another person. And so the thing that came to mind was the three M's, right? Motive, method, two M's and an O, unless you think opportunity begins with an M. It does if you're from Alabama, because I didn't teach spelling. So motive, method, and opportunity, MMO. Christians get very hung up on God's motive. God loves us. God doesn't love us. God wants as many people to go to heaven as possible. Yada, yada, yada. There's all this talk about motive. And there's a lot of talk about opportunity. But the thing that is missing, and the thing that I thought was so powerful about what you were saying, was the measurement of method. And that is the thing that is missing from this sort of God story. And we landed in the same place, and we didn't read each other's answers, right? We're talking about does this kind of weapon appear to fit the way this person died, that sort of thing, that method. And to convince me that there's a God, you have to show me how the thing is done. And by the way, if you're a Christian and you're thinking, but you're asking to be God. No, I'm not. When a cosmologist explains to me why they accept that dark matter exists and how they come to that conclusion, they don't magically turn me into a cosmologist. What they do is explain their method. And great power doesn't answer method. I just wanted to say that I thought you were really, really on track with that analogy, because you're right. We don't have to have reproducibility, but Braxton's only half right that science requires reproducibility. Although, even in your example, you said, we can test a weapon against something like flesh without killing someone else. We can determine whether it's likely or not. In that sense, it is reproducible. Anyway, I am just saying thank you for the answer, because I thought it was really good.
That's why you have me.
I am thankful for it.
Yeah, you can be my bitch. I'm going to have to cut this, aren't I? Right, moving on. Question 8. This one, I think, is genuinely interesting, actually. I think this one touches me, not in that way. And I'm losing it. Being serious, and I do mean this in all serious, this one got to the heart of why I'm atheist, I think.
To what extent did social and moral issues start you down the path toward your atheism? That is to say, the typical Christian or religious views on sexuality, gender, rights, and acts and commands of God in the Old Testament. It seems that many deconversion stories online begin with, or at least include, LGBT issues, purity culture, or hell as instrumental in the deconversion process. It strikes me that what should matter most is the truth and not what we might prefer that the truth were. I honestly wonder how much those issues and ones like them motivate the deconversion rather than all this talk about evidence.
To what extent did social and moral issues start you down the path towards atheism? And we hear this a lot. We've talked to people, and this has come up when we talked to John Steingard a couple of episodes ago. This came up. And when we've talked to other people on our podcast, this has come up. When we talked to Steve Chalk more than a year ago now, or was it a year ago, we talked to Steve Chalk. Similar issues came up about compassion for other people. Steve Chalk is still a Christian. John Steingard no longer identifies as Christian, but compassion for other people featured very highly with both of them.
Yes.
When I've talked with other people, this is tangentially related to this issue, but when I've talked to other Christians about about me being atheist, about why I'm no longer Christian. I have had the direct question. This is when I say talked with, I mean talked with via Zoom, when I've done the Alpha course, when I've done the Genexus course, which are all Zoom courses. So it was face to face in the sense that we were in front of cameras and we could see each other. And I found that a genuinely valuable way of interacting with people, which is why I enjoyed those courses. But a question that came to me from people on both of those courses, or on the video, live talking, was, were you hurt in your Christianity? Was that part of the reason why you left? And there's two answers to that. Is yes, I was hurt in Christianity. So was my wife. She's still a Christian. So are many people who I know have been hurt by experiences within Christianity, and they are all still Christians. So yes, I have been, but no, absolutely no. The reason I left was not because of that hurt. It might have put me off certain people, and there's in a technical sense, yes, I guess it could be possible that some of those experiences made me more attractive to the questions against Christianity. But the amount is so tiny, I don't think I could even measure it, because when people ask me why did I leave, those experiences don't even feature in my thinking and in my mind. So Christians listening, do not read too much into my admission that I got hurt as a Christian, because I saw some people hurt by Christianity far, far, far more damagingly than I ever was. And they remained in faith. Some deeply struggled to remain in faith, and some left. But really, those people were far, far more hurt than I ever was. So please, seriously, don't read too much into that. So what was it that got me out of Christianity? Well, I'm one of those people who says it was science that got me out. Andrew said earlier we were both young earth creationists. And so it was the dismantling of my understanding of young earth creationism, and it was the understanding of the scientific arguments for why that young earth creationism was wrong. It was that started me on the path towards atheism. And once I'd untangled all of that and managed to do away with Adam and Eve and the Tower of Babel and the global flood, I demolished the foundation of the Old Testament. And when you demolish the foundation of the Old Testament, you effectively remove any justification for Jesus existing, because no sin in the Garden of Eve means no need for Jesus. And I couldn't decouple those two things. So Jesus had to become either a human or a myth. I haven't really decided which, but he certainly couldn't be a god, because it just didn't work with the narrative once I'd done away with the foundation of the Old Testament. So that was what got me on my journey out. It's obviously, I can't do the 3 years of struggle justice in less than 3 minutes. So you'll just have to take my word on it. But don't come back at me and say that what I'm telling you is wrong. Don't question me when I say it was my science. Don't tell me that I'm lying when I say it's science, as some Christians have done. So please don't be that Christian. The LBGT stuff and all that came during my deconstruction, my softening to those people, my greater compassion for other people came from all that, because I was quite hard on the line when I was a young earth creationist. My wife and I lost a really good friend from our teenage years because of a hard line against homosexuality. And 30 years later, we both still feel the pain of that. We both deeply regret how badly we responded to that, and the loss of somebody who at that moment in time was the best friend to both of us. And it hurts us to remember that person. Hurts us deeply.
There's a thing about this question that actually there's several things about it that bother me. Here's the thing that I'll say that bothers me most. This question is constructed in such a way as to suggest that social and moral issues are somehow inferior reasons to leave Christianity. Well, let me just say that they're not. If you can read Exodus 21, Leviticus 25, and say, oh yeah, it was fine to own slaves in the Old Testament, and that doesn't cause you as a Christian to ask social questions, then in my view, you're pretty broken. And if you think that I shouldn't ask those questions and perhaps decide against your God, I'm not the one with the problem. Our social and moral issues should be one of the paramount reasons that we examine our worldviews. It is precisely our ethics, our morals, the way in which we interact with each other that is in some sense most meaningful. And if you are getting your morals out of a 2,000-year-old book and older, and you're not questioning them, I'm not the one with the problem. Second, the idea that me leaving Christianity, and I'm only speaking for me, well, and Matthew, to the extent that we have a similar story for you too, in this, where we've agreed about our reports, it is equally important that we talk about that evidence. And so don't construct a question in such a way that you attempt to take away my self-report. Yes, I think there's evidence against Christianity. And yes, it is absolutely paramount to my lack of belief, as are the social issues that I think Christianity fails to address. That's my answer to question 8.
There is a bit in this question that I don't quite understand, and that's the talk about truth immediately after talk about moral issues.
Right.
And I don't equate moral issues with truth. I probably need to be really careful about where I go with this, but I don't understand the link that's being made here. Question 9, nearly there.
Can you name the last 3 academic books you read by theists on the subject? How long ago did you read them? Or is most of your understanding of apologetics and atheism from non-scholarly internet sources, pop-level books, and, let's face it, YouTube videos? And be honest with yourself about this. Anyone can Google up a list of books and paste them in the comments section. But I want to know, are you getting the best from the other side?
Go on, Andrew. How many have you read?
Oh, wow. Okay, so the 2 most recent, because I go through them, I just went back through them within the last couple of Craig Keener's Volume 1 and Volume 2 on miracles. I read almost as much about Christianity as I do other aspects of my worldview, things that are largely naturalism. I don't think Braxton has done a particularly good job of drawing out what he actually wants. It's as if only books give us a good glimpse into the best of Christianity, but I don't think that can possibly be what he wants us to take away. I read Christianity Today. I read lots of theological journals. I worked for an apologetics company, and I occasionally still read their journals. I don't wish to mention who they are or their journals because I'm not promoting them. We engage with the very best Christians right here on this show. And so in that sense, I think I'm doing better than reading their books. By the way, we wrote a response book to Justin Brierley's book. Now, maybe you don't think it's very good, but that's another problem with this question. I don't know what Braxton thinks is the best of Christianity. Surely the heart of the question should be, when you're engaging, are you attempting to take the best Christian position, or at least the position that you're engaging with at the moment, and still manning that position, whatever it is, to give it its best possible hearing? The answer to that question is absolutely yes. I don't use ad hominem attacks against someone else's position. And we here on this show make a point of letting people speak their mind and of helping them do it so that we can get the very best of Christianity. And we're still atheists. But the fact that we don't believe in the Christian God or any other God doesn't mean that we're not practicing the very best in philosophical charity and that we're not looking for the very best answers. We are doing better than reading the books. We are going to the people that write the books and engaging in dialogue with them and helping them make their best case. So yes, I am legitimately looking for the best of Christianity. And the best of Christianity, as far as I can tell, is pretty weak sauce.
I'm concerned a little bit about the way this question is framed, because I've had this question directed at me before by internet Christians. What books have you read? Because Well, I know what comes next. I list a couple of books. It's, oh, you haven't read the right ones. You need to read this one. And while that's not explicitly said in this question, it worries me that any answer given, the next response will be, yeah, but you haven't read the right book. You need to read these books. I apologize, Braxton, if that's not how it was meant, but that's how it feels. I get suspicious when I get asked questions like this because I was brought up in a missionary environment, brought up as a Christian, was a Christian all the way through my teenage years, was a Christian all the way through my 20s, and it was deep into my 30s when I eventually ditched it all. If what it was that kept me in my teen years, in my 20s, was that good enough then why isn't it good enough now? And if I need something that's now, well, then why are there people who were great Christians 50 years ago? What did they have that kept them as a Christian? So I worry about where this question goes and what people call academic, because notice there's the word academic in this question. If I list Justin Briley's book as one of the most recent books that I've read, does that count as academic? One of the other recent books I've read, Evolution or Creation, do you have to choose? Is it Douglas Axe who wrote? I can't remember who.
I think so.
It is. Does that count as an academic book? How many of these do I need to read and still be an atheist before you accept that I'm satisfactorily intellectually atheist? Or is there no answer that I can give you that would convince you that I'm satisfactorily atheist? So I worry where this question goes. Maybe why can't the Bible just be good enough? I've read the Bible.
You
Studied it an awful lot.
You know? That was beautifully done. No, it was great because nowhere in this question is how often do you read the Bible?
Yeah.
By the way, I've read it more time covered more times than I've had birthdays.
Yeah. But am I getting the best from the other side? I don't know. I don't know what the best is there is to offer. I listen to quite a lot of Christian podcasts and I do read quite a lot of material. I'm very active on the Unbelievable Facebook page and there's regular posts from both sides on there. And I read an awful lot of them. And I continually come away unconvinced by the Christian side and satisfied by the atheist side. What is your best? I prefer not to read books. I prefer to consume podcasts or academic reading material that I can read on the web, but I'd rather it was a podcast. That's just the way I roll. If you think I've missed something great, reasonpress@gmail.com. But remember, I've been doing this for 10 years. I haven't intentionally hit all of your worst bits. If I've only been exposed to your worst bits, then that's on you because I've been looking for people to interface with. We've had Christian guests on this podcast. We've had various conversations. We've guested on other podcasts and had various conversations. Do you want me to come onto your podcast and be challenged by you on your ground on the Christian podcast? I will happily submit myself to that. I've not been looking just for the worst bits to bash at them. That's not my MO. So I really don't know where else to go with this.
We're about to put up a round table where we did engage with a team of Christian apologists. By the way, they're self-proclaimed Christian apologists in the same way that we are self-proclaimed counter apologists or whatever, right? But I'm just agreeing that we are looking.
And yes, and that episode that you referred to, that was a wonderful conversation. It was far better than the debate I got involved with. I got so much more out of it because I interfaced directly with the people and felt a little bit of an affinity with those people. And I absolutely have already said this. I absolutely intend to invite those guys on for another conversation so we can have a more wonderful time than we did the other day. Right. Final question.
Let's finish with a pretty common one. If you found out today to your satisfaction that Christianity were true, would you accept God's authority, repent of your sins, and trust Jesus as your king?
Oh, it's an even one. So do I need to go first on this one?
Yes, and you get to go last too, because you're the one that put this together. You had no help from me, so you get to go first and last.
I never have any help from you. Why are you just advertising it now? Oh, come on, Apple user. You walked into that one.
Oh, man. Oh man, and it's still, it's the goo is still falling from the sky. I don't
Yeah.
know. I've been slimed, and it's all true. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of points here. The short answer is no. The long answer is a bit more complex. The first part of the long answer is, well, which incarnation of Christianity is going to be true? Is it going to be my former fundamentalist young earth creationism? Or is it going to be something more along the lines of what Steve Chalk emits? Because I can tell you now, I cannot, under any circumstances, go back to my former fundamentalist young earth creationism. I can't go there. I don't even like some of what I held there. I was, I've already said, lost a good friend because of my position on same-sex attraction. I have absolutely no intention whatsoever to go there again. So if you want to say that same-sex affirming is a sin, I will never repent of that sin because I don't view it as a sin at all. Even if I could believe in God, I would not accept that would be a sin because I absolutely do not want to go and be that version of Matthew again. If you go and listen to the Steve Chalk episode that we did a year ago, you'll hear me say, if I ever went back to Christianity, it would be Steve's version of Christianity. And I meant that a year ago, and I mean that now. So the question is how it would need to be, as mentioned earlier, about being convinced of God, and it would need to be evidence, and it would need to be evidence that I can test. I cannot get there via other means. So would I accept God's authority? I could imagine I'd have no choice because God would be the supreme being. But if I felt that God was saying I should cease to be same-sex affirming, I would reject that authority. Even if it meant I had to accept other parts of his authority, I would certainly fight and rebel against that specific aspect. So I would only be able to repent of the sins that I was able to accept were sins. I struggle with the point about trusting Jesus as my king, because even under the lightest and most attractive versions of Christianity, there's still this concept of God punishing those who don't believe in him, whether it's annihilation. Okay, there is universalism. The only version of Christianity that I can see myself accepting is a version of universalism where everybody ends up in heaven. And if that was the version of Christianity that I became convinced that was true, then it wouldn't be necessary for me to trust Jesus as my king because I'd be heaven bound anyway. So I wouldn't see that as compulsory. Any version of Christianity that requires me to trust Jesus as my king to get into heaven is a Christianity that has got a dictator at its head. And I am anti-dictator. And I probably would join the rebellion because I don't want that kind of God. Absolutely do not want that kind of God. I would rebel. So the only kind of Christianity I could have would be universalism. And then it's not compulsory to trust Jesus. So, no.
I have very little to add to that. I will say that I agree with you about universalism, and this is a hot wash, by the way. This is one of those thoughts that has only occurred while we're here on mic, right? So if you find a problem with this reasoning, I hope that you will challenge it because this is a relatively new construct. Here's my problem with universalism, with a heaven where Jesus accepted everybody. I don't have a problem with a God who might do that. I am far happier with that God than the God who warms the floors of heaven by stacking the body so high in hell that the flames keep the floors warm. That said, there are people that I don't think I could share heaven with because I don't think they could accept me. Now, if we're arguing for some heaven where God accepted everybody and he changed everybody's minds and he created this utopia, then get on with it now and quit putting us through this. I didn't need 2020, and the world didn't need Donald Trump as a leader. Okay, not going to do the politics podcast. My point is, we all have people that we can't get along with by perception, by view, by our very way that we approach our environment. So would I more happily sign on to a God that saved us all? Sure, but it seems pointless. I don't think that could be the kind of God that Braxton is talking about. Maybe it is. Maybe he's a universalist. I don't know. But if he is, it seems incoherent, because how am I supposed to share heaven with someone who would have killed me here? Unless God makes such a fundamental change to me or that person that we become compatible in a way that I can't comprehend. And because I can't comprehend it, I would no longer be me. I don't think I could endorse any version of Christianity, and I don't believe in kings. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Andrew. The end. Thank you, listeners, for listening. You know where to find us for any thoughts and any comments. reasonpress@gmail.com. Feed us back. Tell us where you agree with us. Tell us where we utterly barfed and we completely got the wrong answer. Tell us where we misunderstood the question. That's also fine too. If you're Christian and you want to challenge us back on this and you haven't been offended by what we've said, thank you. reasonpress@gmail.com. Come on the show. If you are a Christian and you've got this far and we have offended you, I apologize. But also please bear in mind what might have offended us to say the things that we said where we've been a little bit less than polite. The river runs both ways. That's a really rubbish analogy. I'm going to leave it there.
I love it. There's got to be some good metaphor in there, though, right?
There is a good metaphor there, but that wasn't.
The waves wash in and out.
That's good quality atheist thinking, that is. Oh boy. Where was I? If I have offended you, I genuinely apologize, but I also want to please understand what might have riled us to say the things that we said that offended you. Braxton, if you made it this far, I do mean it. If you say to us that you would like to come on and accept our invitation, I will not change my mind. I'd love to have a much more polite and a two-way conversation about some of the issues. We obviously wouldn't be able to cover all 10 questions in a convenient time frame, but a couple, I'm sure we could do some really interesting deep dives into some of those, or send someone else our way who will do a better job at tearing us apart. I'm quite happy with that too. Conversations with Christians that end up at better understanding. The agreement part can come later. Let's start with the better understanding. That would be what I want for a conversation with any Christian, regardless of how we start or how we finish. Let's at least seek to achieve better understanding first. Thank you for listening, and we're off. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.